Welcome to the Multifamily Investor Nation podcast. I'm your host, Whitney Elkins Hutton, Director of Investor Education here at PassiveInvesting.com. And I'm excited that you've joined us today. We have an exciting guest today, Nick Stageberg. Nick, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me here.
Yeah, well, Nick, before we dive into your deal, Georgetown Townhomes, 132 units in Rochester, Minnesota, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and where you're at in the multifamily world today.
Yeah, so I have the great privilege to lead a phenomenal team of about 50 people here in Rochester, Minnesota. We have about 375 million in assets under management, about 1,200 units that we manage locally, and then another 300 units in Tacoma, Washington. Have a real estate sales team. We do lots of vertical integration stuff. So we have in-house lawn and snow and construction and cleaning. So there's all sorts of fun stories we could share about that. But you have a pretty fun background, did a whole career in technology, have a bachelor's in computer science and a bachelor's in ministry, and somehow ended up doing real estate. And I've got a lovely wife, Elaine, who's my full partner in the business. We've got 4 kiddos, 8, 6, 4, 2, and one more on the way any day here. We like to do everything at scale. So probably the most important thing about me right there. So that's just a little bit about me and my background.
Well, and Elaine and I go way back, and this is how I found out. I'm so excited. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah,
We're excited.
awesome. Yeah, if you guys are watching the video live, you just saw my draw hit the floor. So,
Baby number 5 is really tough. So only 1 in 100 women that have 4 children have a 5th child. So it's like a huge drop off. Like you go from being like pretty normal, you fit normal cars and restaurant tables and stuff, to like just society is broken. You don't fit into anything. So we just got a new minivan, but we need to get like a Sprinter van or something like that, I think.
all right. Well, let's dive into Georgetown Townhomes, 132 units in Rochester, Minnesota. As you're probably so thankful that you closed this deal before baby number 5 arrived. Let's talk about.
We've got a
Let's
closing like 3 days after the due date. So we'll see for a future deal. So we'll see how that shakes out.
Oh my goodness. Well, when did you close on this property and what was the purchase price?
August 15th, and our purchase price was 20.2 million.
All right, very cool. Now, you and I talked before the show, there's some uniqueness about this deal, but before we dive into that, I want to understand how you found this deal and when you found it.
Yeah, so we started working on this deal in about January of this year. It's an asset that we specifically targeted. I drive past it twice a day. It's kind of partway between my home and my office. Is a nice asset. We had another very similar asset just a couple miles away that did really well. So I reached out to the broker who had sold that asset to the current ownership group that I had a really good relationship with, and asked that broker to kind of reach out on my behalf and see if they'd be interested in selling it. Didn't hear back. And then a month went by, and then their broker reached out to me to ask if I wanted to buy it. So probably trying to cut my broker out of the deal or whatever, but it is what it is. They wanted a pretty hefty price tag for it. I said, that wasn't going to work for me. We kind of went back and forth a little bit, and decided that a deal was not going to come together. And it was kind of interesting. They then reached out and said that they're going to engage in a marketing process. And this whole time, I had not been allowed to actually tour any units, tour the campus. They didn't want to tell the property manager that the property was being sold, which is unfortunately a somewhat common situation to encounter. And they weren't going to allow any of the other prospective buyers to tour the property either. Went through a whole marketing process. No deal happened there either. Just could not get to the price that seller wanted to get. Finally, a month or two later, they reached out to me and said, "Hey, we actually really do want to sell this property. So that price you had mentioned, is that still good?" And eventually we ended up, basically at the price I had originally offered, many months earlier. So got under contract at that price, and went through the whole due diligence process and everything. And the contract process, that was a whole other zoo. So it was a long, careful process to get under contract, through it being off market and then on market and then off market again. But we did finally end up at the price I was looking for.
Well, let's talk about, how you got there and how you got it under contract a little bit deeper. Did you walk the property before making an offer? And Just kind of how many back and forth did you have to go through before you landed on the price that was going to work for both parties?
So I feel like the back and forth on the price wasn't much of a thing. We kind of had a number that we thought was a number that made sense for us. We did not get the privilege to tour the property, so we never saw the inside of a unit. And we had a really good relationship with the property management company that was managing the asset, so they kind of know who we are. And I don't think there was a way we could realistically secret shop the asset without them being like, Nick, why, I know you're not renting a unit here. What are you doing here? So we would like take our kids there to fly kites next door and kind of go on hikes. It's surrounded by this really beautiful green belt. So we just found excuses to be near the property to kind of do a little bit of that sort of due diligence. But ultimately, we just had to kind of get into the deal, assuming that things are what they appeared to be based on some scant photographs. And it was it's not the first time we've had to do a deal that way. There's a lot of sellers that they don't want to tell the property management company that the asset's transacting. I don't think it's the right thing to do, but it's just the way that you have to do business sometimes. So it was probably 100 phone calls of just lots of back and forth. Ultimately, we had a price that we are really, we felt like was the right price for this deal. And the seller went through a pretty exhaustive marketing process to see if they could get a better price. And apparently they couldn't. And then we finally did get under contract.
Well, tell us how you structured that contract.
So it was originally a pretty straightforward contract with like a 90-day closing, 45-day due diligence period, and then while we were under contract, things kind of started to get a little bit funny. So you know, we finally disclosed to the property management company that the property was being sold, and the owner of the property management company, of course, gave me a call instantly, like, Nick, why the heck are you doing this? You're really setting us up for failure here. Why didn't someone tell us 6 months ago this thing was being sold? And I had to assure them this was not what I wanted. This is what the seller wanted. But ultimately, the property management company, very very good property management company, but they were given no incentive to keep their foot on the gas through that contract period. So occupancy went down. There were a bunch of renovations in flight that kind of lost their course. At one point, there really wasn't any site management to speak of or site maintenance, which is really challenging when you've got a 132 unit income restricted townhome community. So my team had to step in and start managing the asset. We would just kind of show up and hang out around the office. We weren't really authorized to enter the office, but people would show up and there'd be no one there, and then we'd call them. It was a really tough process for everyone involved. After a while, though, we got a good footing. So we have a great relationship with that property management company, and the seller allowed us to kind of just chat directly with the management company, make arrangements for renovations. We extended the contract because we got a Fannie Mae loan on it, and Fannie Mae will look at your monthly financials during the contract period, and if you go into 3 consecutive months of declining rent collections, you go into this bad bucket, and it makes it much harder to close on a good loan. And there were 3 months declining rent collections. We had to extend closing again, and we went and started leasing the units. And again, we didn't really have physical access to things, which made it awfully difficult. But we got like an apartments.com ad put up that we started answering inquiries to. We started taking leads from elsewhere in the portfolio to try to fill things up. We're able to get a bunch of units renovated, get a bunch of units filled, and finally get Fannie to a place where they were really excited to close on a great loan on the asset. But it was a very interesting path to get there. That at the end, our solution was they thought of us as a vendor, and they gave us like a vendor key to all the rehabs and the vacant units. And they're like, okay, so Black Swan, they're just like a vendor, but they're handling property management and construction management and leasing. And it was a long winding path. I feel like everyone was upset that they got into that situation, but by the time we got to the end, everyone knew that we were doing everything we could to try to put together a win-win deal.
So, did this really come down to the fact that you were changing property management companies after close? Is that kind of what it boiled down to?
Yes, yep. So it's very common to change property management companies at closing. And anyone listening to this podcast, I would recommend that you tell your property management company that you're selling, and it puts you into a bind, right? Because let's say that you go to sell it and that process takes longer than you expect, or you fail to sell. Well, maybe your property management company, they've kind of got one foot out the door because they know that property is about to transact. but you're almost always going to be able to get a better price for that property if the property management company knows what's going on. And what we do on the buy side is we always offer all site staff just, like a 90-day probationary offer, so that no matter when we close, no matter what the circumstances, like same pay, benefits, everything are going to continue. We're going to try to keep you on as site staff with our management company. And then if it's not a good fit, we'll make sure you have plenty of runway to find a new job with a different management company or whatever the circumstances are. If you're on the seller side, I would just make the same kind of continuity guarantee to that property management comp. Give them a win bonus. If we hit a certain target, all the site staff get $10,000 and continuity for their employment, just whatever you can do. But those are hard, complex conversations to have. So a lot of sellers, they choose to not disclose that to the property management company. And the property management company is super upset when they find out the asset's selling, because as a person who owns a property management company, I can tell you that all of the cost of managing the asset is on the front end. When you're taking over, when you're figuring out where all the bodies are buried, so to speak, and then getting the property into shape. At least if you're a good property management company, hopefully the property is getting better when you take over. And then it's only profitable once that asset is stable. But once that thing is stable, that's when the owner is tempted to sell. That's when you've created all this value, you've improved NOI, and expenses are lower because things are going so smoothly day to day. And that's when things are profitable for the property management company. And that's when the seller will often kind of pull the rug out from underneath that property management company and sell the asset right when that asset is finally profitable for the property management company. So that's why there's this really unfortunate, kind of push-pull dynamic there. So anyone who's looking at selling the asset, I practice radical transparency in all that I do. It's one of our company's 6 core values. So we always just over communicate. Hey, here's what we want to achieve. What can we do to make it so we can win together? And if you offer, say, 10 grand a person to your site staff, if you hit a certain target or whatever, I promise you will get $100,000 minimum in sales price, for each $10,000 bonus you pay out to the site staff. Take amazing care of them. Let them know what's going on. They're not dummies. Like, they know something's up, even if someone shows up pretending to be like an insurance person, which, by the way, I had to do for a different deal a couple of weeks ago. It's very, very common that the seller doesn't want to disclose site staff if an asset is potentially being sold.
Wise words, and thank you for explaining that. Now, I want to go back a little bit. What attracted you to this deal? What's the overarching business plan here?
So, one thing, we're a very mission-driven organization. The majority of our portfolio is considered affordable by different economic standards, little a affordable, so there's not like an income restriction or anything like that, but we live in a fairly high income area. So, if as long as you're spending less than 30% of your income on housing, you're considered to live in affordable housing of one sort or another. So the majority of our portfolio is affordable. And then probably about a third of our portfolio is Section 42 LIHTC affordable housing. We really love affordable housing because it's something that fits our mission. I grew up in Section 8 housing. I've seen all the good and bad things that go with that. And I consider it an extraordinary privilege to grow up in, one of the more challenging environments a human can grow up in. And then, later in life to be able to own that environment, to control that environment, to make it better, and hopefully pass that baton of success to the next generation. And most of the people listening to this podcast, they're in the business of making money by adding value to a multifamily asset, by improving that operating income. And an observation that I made a long time ago is that affordable assets, Section 42 assets, income restricted assets, all the different programs out there, they tend to be operated more poorly than market rate assets across the board. It's exceptionally rare for me to ever encounter a Section 42 asset or a TIF deal asset or any sort of income restricted or rent restricted asset that is operated better than a market rate asset. So we're in the business of creating value by improving operations. And so we said, man, here's an area where not only do we get to serve our mission, but we can add massive value because these assets they're egregiously mismanaged in many cases. And there's lots of interesting situations we can dig into with this particular asset, some of the cool ways that we're going to be able to add value with this asset. So we really love that it was an income restricted asset, a Section 42 asset. That's something that we specialize in. And then I love that it was a super high quality asset. So it's a townhome community, Section 42 townhomes. They're a really exceptional asset class for various reasons in the program. And it was just built to an outrageously high construction style. A lot of times affordable assets can be built to kind of a cheap, kind of level of construction quality. And this was just a really high quality asset that was built. So we saw huge potential for this asset. Just driving by it, you could feel it, just huge potential for this asset. And then finally, there's a 30-year income restriction, rent restriction period that typically goes with these Section 42 assets. And there's less than 10 years left on that for this asset. So at some point in the future, in the not so distant future, this asset will be worth, say, 30 or 40% more just by us running out the clock. So there's this immediate upside potential today by fixing lots of operational inefficiencies that we tend to find with income restricted assets. And then there's this massive kind of windfall event, that, another bite out of the apple, or however you want to think about that, when that income restriction does ultimately expire.
Well, let's talk about the due diligence. You said that there were some interesting things here. Let's first start with the physical due diligence. How did that go on the property?
Yeah, so you have this stereotype in your mind, probably, and righteously so, of a income restricted asset that we couldn't see the inside of. Often when that's the case, it's because the seller doesn't want you to see the inside, because it's rougher on the inside than it is on the outside. On the outside, the community looked great. And I knew this property management company really well. They have good screening criteria. They are not slumlords by any means. They usually take very good care of their properties from a maintenance perspective. So I knew, because that management company had their sign on the door, that it was probably okay on the inside, but we didn't know. And we went to walk the units with low expectations, shall we say. And we first looked at some vacant units that were renovated. We were a little disappointed with the renovations. So we saw that there was like LVP flooring, but it wasn't LVP. It was rolled vinyl that kind of looks like LVP. It's patterned to look like LVP. It had new countertops, but they were new laminate countertops that kind of looked like they were stone countertops in the photos. It had new appliances, but they were new white appliances. They had replaced old white appliances with new white appliances. And we're just really confused. There's mixed finishes, like there would be a plastic chrome bathroom faucet with a oil rub bronze light fixture, and then a gold door handle from the original construction. So they had updated some things, but not all things. And so we were really worried when we saw those renovated units, and it made us wonder what was it going to look like when we got into the occupied units. And when we saw the occupied units, we were blown away at how nice they were, like exceptional condition on the interior of these units. So this community, many of the people who have lived here, they've lived here for decades. In fact, there's multiple people who are on their second generation. Like, they grew up as a child in one of these units, and they're now living as an adult in one of these units. And they've taken amazing care of these units. The different management companies over the years have done a good job kind of managing, maintaining, cultivating those relationships. There's a pride of ownership, so to speak. And we've found that with LIHTC communities, if you can get that dialed in, you have an exceptionally high renewal rate. Our renewal rate for our LIHTC communities is 82%. If you take good care of people, you find amazing tenants, they never leave in those income restricted communities. And that compares with, like a 61% renewal rate in our market rate housing. So we score every unit on a scale of 1 to 10 when we walk the units, and 10 being there's nothing we could possibly do to make this thing nicer. 1 is this is a gut remodel where everything's got to go. 7 out of 10 means it needs like paint and flooring. 8 means it needs paint or flooring. And almost every single unit, more than 90% of them, were a 7 out of 10 or better. And we were expecting a lot of fives. Just that's kind of the expectation you have when you are buying an income restricted community and you weren't allowed to see the inside of the units. So the condition of the units, it absolutely blew us away how nice the units were. And then the next discovery was that in the second phase of the housing, there were some water heaters, and these were special water heaters that run a hot water heat loop and also the potable hot water loop. And we have very high attention to detail when we're doing our unit walkthroughs. We note the condition of every piece of mechanical equipment. We note the manufacturing date, and we noticed that there wasn't a single water heater in this place that was less than 3 years old, or more, I'm sorry, more than 3 years old. Everything had been replaced in the last 3 years. And we're like, did you guys do some sort of proactive CapEx plan? Because these are really expensive dual core water heaters and stuff. And they said, oh no, these things, they fail all the time. And they're obscenely expensive to replace. It's like $6,000 every time we replace one of them. We went back and reviewed the seller financials, and we saw that they had put a bunch of stuff into like the CapEx bucket, and they had $0 allocated to water heater replacements on their actual P&L. We're like, oh, that's not good. And as we're walking through, we noticed there was one unit out of all the units of this type that had an older water heater. It was 11 years old, and that unit had a water softener installed, which was installed by the tenant for their comfort. Again, there's like a pride of ownership. This tenant had just installed a water softener at their own expense, had been there for like 20 years, and had not replaced a water heater in that time. So we have hard water in our area, and we had this convenient test had already been done. Would it extend the life of the water heaters to install a water softener? And it would. So we wrote it into our contract that the seller would need to install water softeners in all the units prior to closing. Sure wish they had done that, earlier, because they could have paid for water softeners for all the units with just the amount of money they were spending every single year on water heater replacements. And so that was just one finding, and there was countless others that go in that bucket. So another example would be that 100 of the units had dedicated water mains. So each individual tenant pays their own water bill, or well, I thought they were paying their own water bill. The water usage seemed awfully high when we did our financial due diligence. But there's 32 units where there's shared water meters. And so the way LIHTC works is you have to credit tenants for utilities that they pay for. And again, how I mentioned that income restricted communities, they're often not managed very optimally. So at some point, a property manager had made the decision, we're just going to pay for everyone's water bill so that it's not confusing from a compliance perspective, that on 32 of the 132 units, we pay the water bill, but on 100 of them, they pay the water bill. And that's a financially disastrous decision to make. And it's bad for the environment, it's bad for the tenant, it's bad for everyone that's involved, because the tenant actually gets like a overly generous credit from the state for the fact that they have to pay their own water bill. I'd rather the tenant enjoy those savings, and then I enjoy those savings. It's a win-win deal that way. The only person it's good for is the property manager, that they have less mathematical, cognitive load in calculating rental rates and stuff like that. We discovered that there was a group of units that did not have a gas meter. And so they took all of the units in that section of the property and just paid the gas bill for every single one of those units. Very identical situation to the water meter, with identically kind of financially disastrous implications. And each time we tripped over these things during our due diligence, we had to like stop everything. Like, okay, all of our walk teams huddle up. Like, are we looking at this wrong? There's like just 6 units here that don't have a gas meter, but I see all those gas meters over there. And we're talking to the site manager, who we'd never interacted with before until we did these unit walkthroughs. And hey, guess what? We're buying the place now. Can you tell us about it? And they're like, yeah, I don't know why there's all these gas meters here, because we pay all the gas bills. And the site manager doesn't understand why they're paying the gas bills. So literally no one standing here in this group, there's like 10 of us, can figure out why the owner is paying these gas bills. At some point, in the past, a property manager said, well, it's going to be easier if we just pay the gas bills. So that, we ran into situations like that over and over again, just huge opportunities to improve operations at the asset that frankly have just win-win financial outcomes for everyone involved. But it does require a lot more cognitive load on the property management team, because there are some compliance implications that go along with that. So that's kind of what that due diligence process looked like. And through the whole process, we're walking rehabs that were kind of stalled out, and we had to move the ball forward and making sure those rehabs got completed. When we started, there was maybe 42 or 43 units that were renovated. By the time we closed, there was like 64 units that had been renovated. So the seller spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on finishing those rehabs, because our contract process took so long. Just a litany of very interesting surprises as we were walking those units, and then pushing things from the contract to close period.
How did the financial due diligence go on this property?
So the books were very professional. Again, that property management company, excellent property management company. So they had really good books to share with us, but they were definitely, a lot of expenses had been pushed below the line or moved to the balance sheet, or some euphemism like that. So which is par for the course. And I don't think the seller did anything that's not a market standard technique of a seller. When we looked at the financials, we were trying to line them up with our in-place expenses for other similar properties, because we have other very similar properties, and they were so far afield that we could not make heads or tails of the financials to a certain extent. So the water bill was like 10 times higher than it seems like it should have been. Oh, that's because they are paying water bills that they shouldn't be paying. And the gas bills were like 10 times higher than they should have been. Oh, it's because they're paying gas bills they shouldn't be paying. And there's 132 water heaters and 132 furnaces, and there's very minimal maintenance for those. And we're like, is somehow like an expense getting pushed into the wrong bucket or something like that. We're not going to go just ask for like a general ledger export or something. So it was very difficult to make heads or tails of that. What I would encourage anyone listening to this to look at is to look really carefully at the rent roll and to look at trailing income, because that never lies. The inspection, the expenses, they can easily be kind of changed and phrased in a more favorable way from an accounting perspective. But at the end of the day, we saw that rents were steadily improving. And when we spoke with the site manager later on, she'd been managing a site for a long time, and she said, yeah, we just kind of kept rents the same for a long time, and then we decided to raise them, and everyone stayed, like 100% renewal rate. So that story of historically increasing rent collections month over month over month over month, that story made sense. And then we just kind of looked at our own pro forma from an expense perspective. I wouldn't say we like threw out the seller's numbers, but we very much kind of came up with our own numbers. For example, we were aghast at what the seller was paying for insurance, and we were able to put together an insurance quote that was drastically lower. Now that actually bit us later on, because the seller was paying like 70,000 for insurance. We had a quote in hand for 32,000, and as many people listening to this know, insurance has been a tough spot lately. And we had a quote in hand from our insurance carrier, prior to offering on it. But when we went to like bind that quote in the contract process, they said, "Oh, sorry, the carrier just changed their guideline and like an hour ago, and so we're no longer going to issue this policy." Went to get new quotes, $170,000, $155,000, up from $32,000. And eventually we put together this really cool win-win deal. All the carriers, they hated how large this property was. Not just that it was a $20 million deal. That's not crazy huge. It's 16 acres of townhomes, just an enormous campus. And they did not like their risk exposure. There's so many roofs, there's so much siding. So what we did is we put together this win-win deal. I spent probably 100 hours of my time on this insurance situation, because for a while we couldn't even get insurance. But one carrier took one piece of the property and another carrier took another piece of the property, and they were related that it was not going over certain thresholds or guidelines they had for exposure on a single asset. So our financial due diligence, it was an exceptionally up and down kind of roller coaster ride, kind of trying to make sense of their financials, plug that into our financials, and then ultimately reconcile that with reality. We're a month into ownership of the asset, and so far things are pretty good. Things are lining up pretty well with our pro forma, but it was a very long and winding process to get there. That's for sure.
Well, they say you make money on the buy side of things, and you put in the labor and the time and attention, and it should pay off for you in the end. So
I
a
just
lot of
realized
people,
I buried the lead there. So we actually have an appraisal in hand for 22.86 million. So we paid 20.2 million, and we walked in with a $2.6 million of day one equity on this particular property. So I think we're in pretty good shape on this one, and an appraiser agrees. It's tough to get appraisers to appraise over purchase price these days. So we're very, very pleased with where we feel like we are on this particular deal.
well, I'm glad we were able to uncover that nugget there.
Would
But
have been the
yes,
first thing I said.
yeah, right. All right. So let's talk about financing on the deal. Can you go into the terms that you were able to secure for the financing? Because you said you did Fannie Mae, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. We usually work with regional banks on deals like this because we're typically projecting a pretty huge lift on NOI, and we've got a really good reputation with local regional banks, and they'll usually underwrite to our pro forma, whereas Fannie, they're very, they're looking at that trailing 12 financials. And in this case, this was an interesting time in the market cycle. In retrospect, I'm so glad that we did not get this thing under contract in January of this year, because it would have been just such an abysmal environment from an interest rate perspective, from just a lending perspective. But we got under contract in April, May timeframe. And around that time is when expectations about where interest rates could go in the future started to finally soften. So 5-year treasury started coming in quite a bit. 10-year treasury, not as much, but 5-year treasury started coming in quite a bit. Now, prime hadn't moved, lending climate hadn't changed very much. So historically, Fannie has not offered like a exceptionally low interest rate for us compared to regional banks. But at this moment in time, because the yield curve was so inverted, 5-year treasury was so much lower than prime rate or what banks are lending at. We're getting quotes at 7.5% to 8.5% from regional banks, and ultimately we locked at 5.6% with Fannie. Now, if I was to go do that deal again today, I might be closer to 5.0% or maybe even 4.9% or something like that. But we were just elated with how much our interest rate improved during that contract and due diligence process. And I was trying to close as fast as humanly possible to lock this thing in because we felt like we had kind of won the lottery in terms of interest rate on the deal. It was a great match between Fannie and this asset because it's a mixed income LIHTC community. You get kind of bonus points with Fannie for that. You get better rate spreads and everything for affordable properties in that way. We got a great IO period. We got a couple of years of IO on it. We got a favorable LTV 65%, which we probably could have gotten an 80% LTV loan from a regional bank, but at such a high interest rate, like it's not worth it. And raising equity is not usually a big problem for us. We're happy to bring a bigger down payment if it improves kind of overall IRR for our investors. So we ended up at a little over 13 million in loan proceeds. It was a grueling process to get to closing. In retrospect, I'm glad we got Fannie, but like in the middle of things, I at many points I said, let's just throw in the towel and go get a regional bank to underwrite this loan because we could have closed months ago. But we're set up for success. I think that we'll be eligible for a supplemental refi on that Fannie Mae loan basically as soon as that supplemental window opens a couple of years from now. So it's a 5-year fixed rate at 5.6%, and we're going to be able to increase NOI so much at this asset so quickly that I think it'll be really easy for us to get a pretty substantial amount of our down payment back very quickly with a Fannie Mae supplemental loan.
Now, you've alluded to several times that the timeline, continued to extend just by, having to bring back up the NOI, having to, get leasing, back on track. We didn't talk about, did you have any earnest money down on the deal? Did you have to extend the deal and put down more money? How did that work?
Yeah, we typically put down 1% earnest money that's refundable during the due diligence period, and we had to keep talking about extending things or having a financing contingency. At the end of the day, I like the seller. I think they're great people. I disagree with their decision not to disclose the sale to the property management company, and then that created a whole lot of headaches for everyone involved. But they were really easy to communicate with, really easy to work with. So it was definitely not a situation where it's contentious. Oh, you need to put in another, X amount of earnest money to extend closing. They understood the situation that everyone was in. We'd get on Zoom calls together with the property manager, the seller, the broker, the maintenance guy, the construction team, leasing. I flew out and met face to face with them at one point. I think that relationship is absolutely everything. Broker did a phenomenal job, just kind of jumping in and facilitating things when it's valuable and staying out of the way when it's just playing a telephone game to kind of insert yourself. Very professional broker, one of the top brokers in the country that brokered this deal, one of the top LIHTC brokers in the country. So everyone was professional. Everyone had done this a million times before. It was kind of a disaster contract to close period, due diligence period. But we didn't have like a huge amount of non-refundable earnest money at risk or anything like that. So at no point were we fearful about losing that money. Our biggest fear was just we had put so much time and love into this asset long before we closed on it. I mean, we were running this asset day to day long before we closed on it, and it would have killed us if we weren't able to successfully close on it. And the more involved we got in the asset, even though the situation continued to deteriorate over time, the more involved we got with the asset, the more future upside potential that we saw. So it started out as like, yeah, this is like a base hit deal. It's good. And then as we're like, man, this is a home run. It's a horrible train wreck of situation we're in now, but in the future we see where this asset can ultimately go. So that was really our biggest fear in the process, was just that we'd lose the deal. And we had launched a private equity fund around it. So I'd hate to go raise capital and then not be able to deploy it and have to find something else. So fortunately, seller was great to work with, broker was great to work with. At no point were we worried about losing earnest money as part of that timeline extension.
Well, let's talk about the raise on the deal. How did you structure the deal for your investors?
Yeah, so this was in Black Swan Real Estate Fund 3 and Fund 4. So Fund 3 we had launched earlier in the year. We hadn't done a deal in like 16, 18 months because 2023 was a bad year to buy deals. We were offering, just nothing was being accepted. Numbers did not work. And I'm very glad that we did not buy anything, through that whole period. So our investors were very hungry to invest, and we had quite a bit of money on our wait list. So that fund filled, pretty much in a day. That was a $15 million fund. Then we got this property under contract, um, probably 3 months after we launched the fund, something like that. We'd inquired with our broker when we launched that fund because we were like, reaching out to generate deal flow in conjunction with that fund launch. But we didn't get under contract until that fund had been open for a little while. And then I think a good rule of thumb for a fund is, if your deal size is larger than your fund size, do you really have a fund, or is it, a syndication that has a couple other assets in it? And that's, I don't know, it's just a rule of thumb that I personally have. So something we've done in the past very successfully is we split that asset 50% into fund 3 and 50% into fund 4, which gives you good diversification. It frankly helps with your capital raise because you can kind of market that deal twice to raise capital for two different vehicles, especially when you've got a home run deal like this one. This was just such a phenomenal deal that it could probably raise, two funds essentially. It worked out perfectly from, a capital velocity perspective. So, as money was coming in and being deployed in fund 3, and then we launched fund 4, everything kind of timed out perfectly there. And all of our funds to date have been structured the same way. We're very boring in that way. We have no fees whatsoever. There's no acquisition fee, asset management fee, capital event fee, disposition fee, loan recourse fee, marketing promotion fee. We don't get any profit from the deal until our investors have gotten a full return of capital. And that's a 50-50 split after that. So if you kind of pencil that into a calculator versus like a traditional syndication structure, your LPs are probably going to come out ahead a little bit in pretty much any scenario with our structure versus a traditional syndication structure. And if things go poorly with a traditional structure, the GP can actually make money from that fee load while the LPs lose money. And we really hate that disalignment of incentives. We have a BRRRR business model, so our goal is not to flip this thing; it's to get to a cash out refi, and that's how we ultimately return capital to our investors. That's why I mentioned that supplemental refi with Fannie. And then we hold these assets indefinitely. We've never sold an apartment building. It's not a trick that we've learned. So we've done that for years across different joint venture partnerships, doing it with single family home deals back in the day, and then with our many private equity funds today. So very simple structure that's worked quite well for us over the years.
Well, Nick, as we wrap up today, I have two questions left for you. One, what did you find easy during the process that you thought would be hard? And then I think we've already answered this question, but I'll ask it again. What ended up being hard that quite honestly you thought would be a little bit easier?
So what did I think was easy that was going to be hard? Insurance. I spoke to the ambush that was insurance. I thought working with the seller might be difficult with kind of that context I had that they didn't want to tell the property management company. Seller was amazing. They were very easy to work with. What did I think was going to be hard that turned out to be easy? The condition of the units and that kind of process I thought was going to be pretty difficult. That turned out to be pretty easy. I wasn't sure how well, frankly, the numbers were going to work when I added everything up because we're still kind of coming off of that 2023 feeling. And when all is said and done, this is going to be one of the best deals we've ever done. That's my feeling now that I own it today. Now that we've gone through that whole process, so I'm elated for that. I think there's a clear path to this asset being worth $30 million in the not so distant future. We're going to take NOI from 1.15 million on like the seller's T12 to we're already at kind of 1.25 million after owning it for a month, which is not a bad spread to achieve in 30 days. And I think there's a very clear path to like 1.7 million in the not so distant future. So from 1.1 to 1.7 million, that's a heck of an NOI spread. And all of our value add plans are kind of coming into place. So when I first started looking at this deal, I was like, man, I don't know how all these numbers are going to work. I've offered on so many deals that have not come to fruition throughout 2023. And then by the time we got through everything, it ended up being just kind of a home run deal. It's a deal where you had to stop running the numbers, right? Like it's like, yeah, we're good. The numbers are going to be fine. This is not a razor thin margin deal where we have to make sure we're making money on this, which is it's a good feeling to have.
Well, Nick, thank you so much for your time with us here today. If people want to learn more about you, how can they do so?
Yeah, anyone here can go to blackswanteam.com, blackswanteam.com. My calendar's out there. You're welcome to block 15 minutes on my calendar. If there's anything we can do for you to offer you value, if you want to invest in one of our deals today or at some point in the future, or you want to trade, war stories about, operations or something like that. Whatever I can do to offer you value, if there's, some mutually valuable way we can spend our time. We've got lots of great content out there that we give it all away for free. You can check all that out on blackswanteam.com. And we actually do have Fund 4. I think there's a couple million of room left in that particular fund right now. So you can see that there too.
Awesome. Well, Nick, thanks again for sharing your insights and experience with us here today. We look forward to hearing about your future deals.
Thanks so much, Whitney. It's an honor to come on every time.